Thank you, everyone. Great to be here. It's a Friday thing going on, I understand, but there are a lot of people joining us online too. So today, what we are going to discuss is on the evolving business models in the medtech business, especially digital health. Over the past 2 days, we have heard about a lot of innovations in the medical devices and digital health forming solutions around it. However, the industry has always struggled to monetize whatever the digital component are. Whoever is a stakeholder, provider, payer, patients have always appreciated the digital part in the offerings, but have never been made a successful business case for those innovations to survive. And I have personally seen, while advising a lot of different companies, that many digital innovations do not see the light of the day as they don't think about the business models early enough. So to discuss this today with me, we have got an amazing panel. We have got with us Andrea Varsavsky. She is VP of Delivery Operations with Evidation Health. We have with me Celeste James. She is VP of Equity and Population Health at Big Health, doing amazing job in expanding health equity and mental health access. We have with us Yuri Rosenman, who is SVP of Business Development with Propeller Health, is a part of ResMed today. Propeller Health has been a pioneer in making various payer contracts and trying ways to monetize it with different stakeholders. So we will have a great chance to listen from Yury on how they have able to done that. And Andrea is over here with her background in product development, is to tell how these business models could be best realized. So why don't we do this? We pass on to, for a short introduction, and then we'll move on to the topic. Andrea, to you.
Sure. So I can give a short introduction. As Deepak said, I'm here to represent the voice of product development. I've got a long history of working in medical device R&D, in epilepsy, in hearing science, and then more recently in glucose sensor development at Medtronic. And so I have a lot of, insight as to what it takes to build products. Now I'm in quite a different role. I'm in a digital health company called Evidation Health. And what we do is we try to bring information, actionable information, to patients outside of the clinic wall. And so what that means, is a lot happens between physician visits, a lot of information or a lot of things can occur, and we want to make sure that people have access to that in that time. And so right now we do that by partnering with pharma and medtech companies so that we can drive research to innovate, but we also just recently started launching some prototypes of things that we might interact with clients or customers or participants directly. As an example, we've got a flu surveillance monitoring, which people opt in, and we guide them to see, hey, something's changed in your behavior. Maybe something's different. You should go to a doctor and check it out. So more as an augmentation type of strategy. So with that in mind, I think when I'm thinking about digital health, we have quite a broad understanding of what that might mean. And specifically, we're very interested in how to marry consumer-grade information with medical-grade information, because there's a lot of data out there that is imperfect but still valuable. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Andrea.
Wonderful. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Celeste James, and I am the Vice President of Equity and Population Health at Big Health. I am fairly recently in the digital health world. My first foray, I came for many years at Kaiser Permanente, where I served to advance health equity with a focus on community-based health. And so I'm delighted to be now with Big Health, guiding our big vision to be a company that is really focused on mental health equity. Big Health is a digital therapeutics company that delivers treatments for insomnia and anxiety. Those are our two current treatments. We are a clinically based, evidence-based company that supports mental health through digital therapeutics. Our effort is really to be a non-drug option for people who suffer from these disorders. We believe that we can operate at scale, that we can provide mental health care for those who need it most. My job is specifically to help us to evolve our business model to enable us to reach people who have the highest needs and the lowest access to mental health care. Currently, our model is to provide these services through health plans and through employers. We pioneered a very innovative model of working with pharmaceutical benefit managers to be able to be reimbursed as one would be reimbursed for drugs through pharmacy budgets. So my job is to help us to evolve beyond that to scalable, reimbursable models to reach underserved populations. So I look forward to talking more about that, and I'm delighted to be here as well.
Thanks, Celeste. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yuri Rosenman. I'm delighted to be here. It's been a fantastic couple of days listening to pitches as well as presentations from early startups, innovators, really driving significant digital transformation in this space. My background is primarily pharmaceutical. Started out at Pfizer doing analytical development, clinical development, as well as licensing and the commercialization of novel pharmaceutical entities. Over the last 5-7 years, it's been primarily a journey through digital health, initially with Qualcomm Life, with the focus on connectivity and really driving remote patient monitoring and remote therapeutic monitoring use cases across multiple disease conditions. I have also done significant amount of work at Fitbit with the focus on software as a medical device, sort of walking that narrow path for a consumer-grade device, but at the same time being able to do early disease detection and progression for a number of indications, one of them being atrial fibrillation on the wrist, as well as sleep apnea. And of course, these are the areas that not only interesting from ensuring that you do the early diagnosis, but also providing treatment to patients early. Some of you may know that atrial fibrillation, a lot of patients find out that they actually have AFib when they actually admitted to a hospital with a stroke. So those are the kind of sort of early disease detection opportunities. They can certainly, predict and prevent the type of conditions that could lead to very, very serious consequences. I'm with Propeller Health, which is part of ResMed. We are a digital health company focused on asthma and COPD, but as well as closely related comorbidities, especially through our relationship with ResMed, which as a name implies, stands for respiratory medicine, has been on the front end of this path to help patients dealing with sleep apnea, as well as very acute respiratory conditions. At Propeller, initial focus was around hardware and enabling connected drug delivery and being able to detect date and time stamp of the inhalation. And as we progressed through our commercial path, we expanded the reach to also provide patient engagement, patient support, patient intervention options by working directly with patients and users. And then, of course, a platform for healthcare professionals, which can intervene and provide education, support, coaching for patients, as well as others that participate in healthcare, as well as software as a medical device and algorithms to detect and manage conditions associated with respiratory conditions. So looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Yuri. Let me start this with Celeste. We have a lot of definition of digital health going around. So people start with digital surgery, people go to consumer health. So the spectrum is huge. What is digital health for you?
So at Big Health, we look at digital health in more or less 3 categories. One being telehealth, which is, of course, driven by either a physician or a therapist or other at one end and the patient at the other. This is given shortages, especially of therapists related to mental health, this is not a scalable option, but it certainly is a clinically based one and an evidence-based one as well. The second is wellness apps. There are a number of wellness apps that have emerged, and wellness apps also have their place in the marketplace. Oftentimes they are not evidence-based clinical treatments, but they are scalable. And then somewhere in the middle, we have digital therapeutics, which in the case of Big Health, our digital therapeutics are clinically based clinical solutions or evidence-based clinical solutions. We provide these therapeutics, as I said, to address insomnia and anxiety, two of the most common mental health conditions. And so these treatments do not require a coach or a therapist. They are intended to reduce some of the stigma surrounding surrounding mental health care. They are convenient, they are affordable, and they can be, and we are definitely working to make sure that they are culturally responsive. So those are the three categories that we typically look at when we consider digital health and our own digital therapeutics.
That's great. Andrea, for you, what is digital health?
Yeah, that's a kind of terrible question to ask an engineer because I naturally gravitate to everything it could be, right? And it is such a broad category because, you know, as a concept, it's anything related to how we use digital technology to impact health. So totally agree with the classifications categories that Celeste just spoke about. So maybe I can just focus about what it's like for Evidation, which, as I mentioned, to us, it's really about bringing insight outside of the clinic walls. And so without necessarily, it doesn't have to be a consumer, it doesn't have to be medical grade, but really just outside to augment health in everyday life, as opposed to just having very discrete events in which the patients consult with the physicians. I know that there is much more to digital health than that. This is just what Evidation does. I know in my past life in Medtronic, there were very different types of digital health, some of which overlap with what Celeste spoke about, but even just like insight-based type of I guess, applications that would say, hey, this is how your health is going. Given every ecosystem of every medical device that you're on, this is the benefits that we're seeing, these are the trends that we're seeing, and providing that so that you can augment how someone can manage their own therapy.
That's good. Yuri, it's your opportunity right now. So I just want everyone to realize how varied the definition of digital health could be.
So digital health really refers to the use of information and communication technology in medicine and other health disciplines to manage illnesses, risks, and facilitate wellness. So it's a very, very broad definition. I don't really like it because I think the only way really to make a difference is to get much more focused, and focus comes from fully understanding the needs of the patients and being able to manage the needs of patients across all of the different stakeholders, whether it's pharmaceutical company, payer, or provider. And sometimes there is, of course, tension. And my focus at Propeller is really twofold. One is around digital companion, and the other one is around digital therapeutic. And when it comes to a digital companion, it's more of a short game. It's the things that you can do today easier. The validation and the regulatory path is simpler. And then when you think about a digital therapeutic, is more of a long game. You have to start now in order to be able to benefit from the options and opportunities that come. Especially for a standalone digital therapeutic, it may come sooner, but it's when you think of a digital therapeutic in the context of an add-on therapy with a pharmaceutical entity, that is something that needs to happen sooner rather than later from a point of view of participating in the clinical path to get there with approval and being approved in the same context as a typical chemical and biological entity. So, as we begin to think about the commercial and business models, it's very important to focus on what do we actually mean. Because if we use the very broad definition of digital health, then pretty much any company can indicate that they participate in a digital transformation leading to digital health, whether you're providing compute and storage to digitize imaging records, you can claim that you're participating in digital health. But in reality, are you really moving the needle and helping patients live healthier and more productive and fulfilling lives? That is, of course, then questionable. So my preference as we begin to have this discussion is to begin to kind of map real journeys for patients that can derive benefits through potentially digital therapeutics or digital companion approaches.
Thank you, Yuri. No, the focus of this panel will be and should be on the evidence-based medicine, right? So that's what we are focusing on. I'll start with Celeste again. Since we are discussing about business models, what have you seen? If you help people realize how do you monetize and how do you grow the access to a particular digital health, that will be really helpful. So we're all eager to see what are the different business models that have been successful in this field.
Yes. Well, as I stated earlier, I'm learning more and more in my 3+ months with Big Health about the different models that are out there. But what I can say is that the business models that are most likely to succeed are the ones that are going to provide convenience, affordability, access, and by access I mean availability when, where, and how the patient wants and needs it. And as I mentioned, cultural relevance and cultural responsiveness. So, we have seen in the last couple of years, again, I'm going to focus on Big Health and our focus on mental health. We have seen that the pandemic has contributed significantly to mental health, to what we are seeing now as a mental health crisis. We have also observed across the globe the effects of our reckoning with racism, and inequality in this country and others that has also contributed significantly to a mental health crisis. In the last couple of years and through the pandemic, 1/3 of American adults have reported having some challenges with mental health, specifically anxiety and depression. So there's a great need for mental health care. And at the same time, there is a significant shortage of therapists. 75% of therapists in another report say that they have extended wait times, sometimes months. So given the shortage of therapists, the increased demand, as well as the ongoing stigma around getting mental health care treatment, we feel very, very certain that digital therapeutics have a place in addressing these issues. So again, our current model is that we are reimbursed through partnerships with health plans and employer groups, and in our partnership with CVS Health through PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit managers. Now, obviously that has some challenges. We are also at Big Health dedicated to mental health equity, which means that we want to serve among our population. We want to serve people who are underserved or poorly served by the medical system. We know that there are deep health disparities out there that we must address. And so in order to reach people who are, have the highest rates of mental health challenge and the least access, we have to be able to expand those models. So we are looking at creative partnerships with community providers. Obviously, Medicaid and Medicare are also avenues to ensure reimbursement and to reach populations that most need it. But we're going to have to be extremely creative, and we're beginning to do that. And that's one of, again, my jobs is to intentionally create models that are going to enable us to reach populations that need it and to be able to be reimbursed for it. So I think that we're going to see lots of different models evolving, but I believe that we're going to have to work very creatively with community-based partners, build trust, and build access to those who need it.
Celeste, these are great points. One follow-up to that is, how critical is the data in this business model?
Thank you for opening that. I should have said that. Data is absolutely critical. We have to know not only are our treatments effective, safe and effective, but we have to know if they're serving the needs, if they're creating remission rates that are comparable to other treatments. In the case of meeting the needs of underserved populations, we want to make sure that our treatments are creating remission rates that are comparable to the general population. So that means we want to make sure people are using the products, using the treatments, they're staying with them. We know that therapy, especially in populations that tend to be medically underserved, that sticking with treatments is very difficult, one, because of inconvenience, and also because of shame. And if we can reduce those barriers, which we intend to do, then we're more likely to see the remission rates that are comparable to the general population, if not better. So data is really, really key to that. We have to collect it. And we know to be of value to payers, patients, and providers, we have to be able to provide data, and Big Health is doing that.
That's great to understand, Celeste, from your perspective. I'll also move to Yuri right now, because Yuri has worked with different stakeholders on different business models. If you have to pick top 2 or top 3 business models that you have seen has become effective in the domain, that will be helpful, because I'm coming from a place where many digital therapeutics or software as a medical device to come to us and say, hey, Deepak, I just got 2 payer contracts. And they go and they get listed on an IPO, and then they realize that the larger access is not there, to Celeste's point. So they have never looked at the affordability, the access part of it. So help us understand how those business models have been successful. Which are those top 2 or 3 you have seen?
That's a great question. I would say from a business model perspective, you do need to look at different stakeholders and manage their needs sometimes, and especially not only from a point of view of pharmaceutical industry, payer and provider, but you also need to look at the geo context on where the companies are located and who they're serving. So the business model that seems to work when you're working with pharmaceutical industry, which gets funded easier, is the area around demand generation. So even though it may seem somewhat sinister to only think of it as a demand generation, but being able to identify patients early, whether they're the right candidates, for the drug, by doing early detection, whether it's around, atrial fibrillation or diagnosing patients with Alzheimer's through the use of various tools and technologies to identify who is in that early stage and potentially can be helped through a therapy, whether it's a typical classical therapy through a drug pharmaceutical entity, or whether it's something that combines digital with a pharmaceutical as a result of early disease detection. So if you're working with a pharmaceutical company trying to pitch idea around patient engagement, patient support, it is interesting, but it's difficult to get it funded right from the get-go. It's much easier to focus on those areas that drive that level of demand generation and potentially, let's say, exacerbation. So to give you a real example, if you're thinking about respiratory, such as, let's say, asthma, starting, let's say, with a drug which is based on inhalation therapy could be the first step. And in US, typical therapy, let's say for a single or double or a triple, is going to be somewhere between $100 to $400 per patient per month. And as you may know, over the course of 4, 5, 6 months, you see the level of adherence drop to about 50 to 60%. So being able to support the second model where you are driving adherence in patients and continuation to use the medication correctly is extremely important. Building on that, using the data to predict where potential exacerbation may happen so that the patient can be switched potentially to a biologic, which is a lot more expensive, anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 per patient per month. Those are very difficult points in patient journey, and at the same time, it's difficult for payers and providers to assume that level of cost without the data and the evidence-driven approach to ensure that patient is at that point in their disease progression. But those are the business cases that certainly get funded because it's important to either keep the patient on the therapy, conventional therapy, for as long as possible by ensuring that they're adherent and compliant to the treatment plan that has been prescribed. And if they're in fact adherent and compliant and doing everything they can, then maybe that's the right point to step them up to a more expensive treatment. And that point is important to a payer who is trying to provide all of the guidance and coaching and support to delay that point in time, whereas a pharmaceutical company may be interested in getting some of those patients on the therapy quicker. And that is the balance that is important, and it does drive a number of commercial and business models, certainly for us at Propeller, across all of the stakeholders. The reason it's also important to think about geos, because the same business case is applicable in US may not be as applicable outside of US. To give you an example, inhalation therapy, let's say in US, maybe $300 to $400 per patient per month. If you're operating on about 30% gross margin, you have about maybe $130 left, meaning pharmaceutical company, to do something about it, to do some level of intervention and use that money. If you are operating in Europe or in UK, it may only be 50 pounds sterling. So again, operating on the same 30% gross margin, you only have $17 or $18 left. Pounds left. In that particular case, the focus on pharma to be the payer and to support the program may become a lot more difficult. So you may really need to work with the integrated payers such as the NHS to fund the program for the patients directly. So it's important to consider business models not only as you think about each individual stakeholder and what's important to them, but also to think about where they're located and how to configure those type of models. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I did not want to interrupt the chain of thought because I realized from your response is there are multiple stakeholders and everyone has a different need to do that. And that brings me to the most important internal stakeholder in the company. You have Yuri, Celeste coming to you with different product features that is being expected out of the market. And the reason why I really wanted the product development team to be here is to give those business models any light of the day. The product development team needs to be behind. So tell us from a life cycle approach perspective, how do you deal with so much of demand? And what is the criticality for you to understand the business model?
Yeah, I would say that it is incredibly important for business development to be in lockstep with product development. Don't leave it to the engineers to figure out what they want to build because they will build crazy stuff. It's literally going to happen. We have very limited, like if you're thinking about the different stages of product development, there's the very early R&D that you need to do to vet out technology. As a minimum, I'm not saying at that stage you need to have a full-fledged business model and know exactly how it's going to work, but as a minimum, you need to understand what user needs you're trying to solve. Because if you leave it to the engineer, they will take it in a direction that probably no one else will. I'm just thinking about personal experience, getting very excited about a filter that I was like geeking out over. Honestly, I was the only person that was interested in that. That's not useful, that's not money well spent for the company, and we do have limited resources. So the earlier we can understand what the user needs are going to be, then we can start the solutioning process to start vetting out technology that will tell you what the bounds of that might be down the road. Now, when you get to the product development, actual implementation or the actual product development lifecycle, I'd say that you need to be even more informed at that point. And the reason for that is that the product development lifecycle, even though it's fine-tuning technology has been vetted, it takes a very long time, particularly in medtech. And details matter here. If you think as an example, I don't know, distribution channels, is it going to be direct to the consumer or over the counter? The things that you need to qualify as a product development person in those two scenarios might be completely different. Sterilization parameters, packaging parameters, shipment testing, conditions that you need to understand how much shelf life something is going to be. Even qualifying shelf time itself, if it's going to be over the counter, needs to be a lot longer. You need to build a fundamentally different product. So at that point, again, it's not about how you're going to be charging necessarily, how you're going to be making money, but at least understand how the product is going to be used to sufficient detail so that you're building the right de-risking strategies in that process. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, Andrea. But help us understand also the part of the data. I have seen more than often that the business side, the marketing team, the corporate strategy come to you or to the product development team with a request, can I have this data point? Can I gather this data point? Can this data point could be reflected? So how often have those not been successful?
It's happened to be many times in which we're halfway through a development cycle and someone from a different function, whether it be R&D or otherwise, comes and says, oh, but actually we wanted to see this data. It's like, we haven't built that in, right? And so you really have to get creative around how to get that information. I think one thing that R&D should do as part of the conversations with the business development is understand the range of things that might be possible, because you can do a lot of de-risking just by building infrastructure, whether it's the data structures or the collection or the information that you're collecting, even honestly just the interfaces between the software and the hardware, that prevent you from doing things once you've gotten too far down the road, right? And so if we can build a system as flexible as possible, it can fit, the refinement of the business model can have more flexibility in how it would be implemented. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, Andrea. But for us, the one thing that I have realized in this first developing digital health space is a lot of ideas is there outside. People want to do many things. People want to publicize many data. People want to help each other. But when it comes down to the product development, there is feasibility aspect of it. Sometimes some camera is not available. Sometimes the chips are not available. Sometimes particular signal is not coming out of the system. But you're trying too much to pressurize your product development team. That leads to a down the road recalls, down the road not serving the needs of the client, not needs of the stakeholders. But since we are over there and we have discussed about what are different business models that we have seen and worked, I'll put us in a very difficult situation to see what business models have failed. Celeste, from your experience, how many of those you have seen failing?
Again, what I would like to speak about is what I know will reduce failure rates in terms of business models and in terms of digital health, and that is, again, ensuring that that your treatments or that your solutions are clinical in nature, that they have the evidence behind them. Big Health has done 13 randomized controlled trials and has 64 publications. So we are heavily researched, perhaps the most researched digital therapeutics on the market currently. And we are very much, as I said before, focused on reducing bias and reducing stigma in mental health care. And so when you talk about product development, we've developed frameworks for cultural responsiveness in product design that are agnostic of the product or the treatment, but really about the process. And so to the extent that we can focus on and standardize certain processes to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our patients, the less likely we are to fail. And likewise, in our research, we have frameworks, again, focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion in research so that we are getting more diversity in our clinical trials, and again, meeting user needs, doing lots of user research, and ensuring that we won't fail for lack of meeting the needs of the patients who are using our treatments. So I think being able to do that, create frameworks, standardization that we share with the industry, will certainly help to ensure no failure.
No, Celeste, I hear the word patient centricity in your response. The patient centricity.
Absolutely.
So help explain how patient centricity can be monetized, let's say. How does it resonate with different stakeholders in your experience as Big Health? So you talked about data, you talked about collecting data. So how that patient centricity helps?
Again, I think that it's really about showing value for patient, provider, and the payer, right? We all have to be able to see that there's value, that outcomes are improving, that remission rates in the case of mental health or whatever is the health challenge are evident. And we have to be able to show that we are reducing healthcare costs, especially among those who have the highest costs of providing healthcare to them, who require the highest amounts in supporting their healthcare, I should say. And so if we are creating products that are centered around the patient's needs, that are convenient to the patient where and when they need their care, then we can reduce the costs of their care and have a win-win for all parties involved. And so if that's the question that you're asking, I think we can certainly create patient-centric solutions in digital health in the same way that we have seen in in-person healthcare.
That's where I was going, because we learned a lot about patient centricity, but even people are trying to develop an application that is patient-centric, have difficulty in translating to business models.
Absolutely.
Yuri, we'll end this with some of the final thoughts. The major thought of all the innovations out here who are either in Series B, Series C round of the funding, is when they should start thinking about business models.
I think thinking about a business and commercial model should start pretty much from day one, because defining who will be your target audience for your product or your innovation should happen not in isolation from product development or marketing or from the investment, because quite frankly, detachment from a business and commercial model leads you to potentially really interesting, innovative solutions that are not yet maybe ready for the market or potentially do not really address patient needs. I think the discussion around patient centricity is extremely important, but what you will notice that in many cases, the patient is not a direct payer for the services. It is someone else who pays for it. And making sure that you establish the right balance between the patient needs, who may not be the payer, and ensuring that that business model that you're addressing the patient needs by balancing the commercial and business needs as you're developing your product really should happen on day one. If you lose that, that connection, what you're very likely to see is development of something where it's a solution looking for a problem versus identifying a real compelling value proposition right from the get-go. Then all of the pilots and proof of concepts that you're running early, they focus on that business and commercial model that you're trying to address versus sort of trying to find yourself and constantly building that airplane as you're trying to take off. I think the more you can do up front in defining that business and commercial model across all of the different stakeholders, across various geos where you want to play, and at the same time keeping that patient centricity element there, even though the patient may not be always at the point of that business and commercial connection. So I do think it's quite important to get that going quite early.
Andrea, here, how many times have you seen that you have started thinking about business model from the day one, or the product development team is aware of the business model from day one?
I think it's getting more standard. As in thinking about my early days in my career, it was a complete disconnect, at least in my experience. Obviously, different companies operate very differently. But it is becoming more standard to start those conversations much earlier and engage with across all the teams that will be involved in the development cycle much earlier. And so there's a lot of DRM, design for reliability and manufacturing, going on that really embeds that into the process. There's a lot of acknowledgement that technology and business models need to actually work together. So I'm hopeful that these best practices are being translated to the real world, to companies, and that everyone's operating much closer to that than it used to be true in the past. Of course, there's still going to be some hit and misses, so.
No, thank you, Andrea. I will conclude this with Celeste's point earlier. What will make the business plan successful? Celeste, if you can tell us, what do you think in digital health, which business plan will be successful?
Well, we expect that in the next 3 to 5 years, that digital therapeutics will be as scalable and as practical as drugs, and certainly we expect that will continue to be a non-drug option, given the long-term risks of taking drugs. And so we expect that we'll be able to see many business models in digital therapeutics and digital health continue to succeed, especially with the growth in technology and a focus on patient-centricity, as you said.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yuri.
much.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Celeste. I hope we all have had some amount of thought process over here. It's obviously 40 minutes and we cannot cover all the business model. The goal was to see how product development business models work together. If you want to join and connect with any of our panelists, feel free. And I will conclude this by giving a huge round of applause to the panel and also to Scott and his team who has put this together. Yeah. So kudos to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.